what you quarrel with is that the initial assumption about man today is that he's basically good,
Yes.
but he goes astray and the blame must be put elsewhere. Now, indeed, there is some legitimacy in that point of view, in that poverty and oppression and exploitation does set many problems for man in which he doesn't always behave well. Would you not subscribe to it at all?
Yes, man, this is where we've got to start, with men as he is today. And my quarrel, you see, with the general outlook of today is this, that they begin to talk about treatment before they've established a true diagnosis. Now, I can't help putting it like this, you see. It's a very poor doctor who medicates symptoms and isn't aware of the disease that is producing the symptoms. Well, to me, the disease is this fallen or sinful nature of men. And because that is true, none of your medication of the symptoms is going to deal with the problem. And I maintain that this is what history is teaching us, that with all our advantages today, the problem is as great as ever.
What then is the nature of man's sin that you wish us to recognize?
It's this. It isn't so much that he does things that are wrong and that thereby makes himself miserable. Now, I think this is an important point, if I may say so. I'm glad you asked that question. There are some people who would represent sin as a sickness and say that man is sick. There are Christians who would say this. Well, I agree that man is sick, but to me, that's not the essence of the problem. The essence of the problem is that man is a rebel, and he is sick because he's a rebel. In other words, the business of Christianity ultimately is not simply to make us feel happier or even to make us live a better life. It is to reconcile us to God. Man, you see, from this biblical standpoint, was never meant to be autonomous or self-contained. This is my quarrel with the modern view. They regard men as autonomous. He is the master of his fate, the captain of his soul. It's so obviously ridiculous because he isn't. However, this is where they start. Whereas I start by saying that man was not only not meant to be autonomous and can't be and can't act as such, but he only functions truly when he lives his life under God. The God who made him has made him in a given way and has put laws in his nature. While man doesn't respond to this essential law of his being and is quarreling with his maker, he's bound to go wrong. He's bound to be miserable, and what he does will be wrong. He'll produce chaos. And he's done so throughout the centuries. This is the whole story of the human race. But it isn't merely that he's sick. It's that his attitude towards his maker is wrong. Now, the Apostle Peter, for instance, puts it in a phrase like this, that Christ came into the world to bring us to God. That's why Christianity must never be thought of as a sort of cult, which heals your body, enables you to sleep at night and to stop worrying and all. Now, that's to turn it into a cult. The real object is to bring men to his true position, which is that he is in communion with his Maker and is living to the glory of his Maker. Now, there's a very well-known definition of this. The Scottish Confession of Faith, the Presbyterian Confession of Faith, known as the Westminster Confession of Faith, they produced a shorter catechism. And the first question in that is about man. What is the chief end of man? And this is the answer. The chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. But you see the order. You glorify God. Or let me put it in another way to you. A clever fellow, a lawyer, one day tackled Jesus Christ and said, which is the first and the greatest commandment of the law? You see, they were dealing with about 613 commandments, and they were arguing as to which was the greatest. Well, that fellow had a great shock when Christ answered him. He said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul and all thy mind and all thy strength. That is the first and the chiefest commandment. The second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now today, people start with the second and forget the first.
You know, this point of view is obviously held with great conviction by you, but I would have thought it brought you into conflict not only with people who don't subscribe to the Christian religion, but to many other Christians too.
Well, of course it does. I'm sorry about this. This is something I deeply regret. But this isn't the first time, you know, that minorities have been right. And in any case, we don't decide this kind of question by counting heads. I know nothing about these things, primarily, apart from what I find in the Bible. But I maintain that the story of the human race and the story of civilization is a proof of the truth of the Bible.